Imagine working your entire life, waking up early every morning, rushing through traffic, stressing about bills, only to realize at the age of 60 that you are still not financially free. This is the reality for millions of people around the world. But what if I told you that one simple shift in mindset, not a degree, not a promotion, not even a higher salary, is what separates those who stay stuck from those who build real wealth? In this Rich Dad, Poor Dad summary, we're not just reviewing a book, we're exploring a story that challenges everything most people believe about money, jobs, and security. Robert Kiyosaki grew up with two fathers. One was his biological father, highly educated, respected, and working a stable government job. He believed in traditional success. Go to school, get good grades, find a secure job, and work hard until retirement. Robert called him his poor dad. The other father was the parent of his best friend. This man had little formal education, yet he built businesses, invested wisely, and eventually became one of the richest men in Hawaii. Robert called him his rich dad. As a child, Robert was confused. How could one man with degrees struggle financially, while another without academic success became wealthy? This question became the foundation of everything he later wrote in this Rich Dad, Poor Dad book summary. One day, Robert and his friend decided they wanted to become rich, so they asked Rich Dad to teach them how. Rich Dad didn't give them a lecture. Instead, he offered them a job, working long hours in one of his small stores for almost no pay. At first, the boys were excited, but after weeks of hard work with very little money, frustration turned into anger. They felt cheated, they felt exploited. And that's exactly when the real lesson began. Rich Dad explained that most people spend their lives working for money because they are controlled by two emotions, fear and desire. Fear of not having enough money pushes people to accept jobs they don't enjoy. Desire for comfort and status pushes them to spend everything they earn. This emotional cycle creates what Rich Dad called the rat race. You work to earn money, you earn money to pay bills, then you work even harder because your expenses keep growing. And before you realize it, years have passed, but you're still running in the same circle. One of the most powerful ideas in this synopsis of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is learning to see money differently, not as something you chase, but as something you learn to control. Rich Dad introduced Robert to a simple concept that most schools never teach, the difference between assets and liabilities. He said, if you want to be rich, you must understand this one rule. Assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out. It sounded too simple, but when Robert looked at the lives of adults around him, he realized how few people truly understood this. People bought expensive cars, bigger houses, luxury items, believing these things made them rich. But every month, those same items were quietly draining their bank accounts. Rich Dad focused on the opposite strategy. He built assets first, businesses, investments, properties, and only later enjoyed luxuries that his assets could pay for. This was a completely different way of thinking about money. As Robert grew older, he noticed something interesting. His poor dad worked incredibly hard, was intelligent, and was respected by society, but he often struggled with financial stress. His rich dad also worked hard, but his hard work was focused on building systems that could generate income even when he wasn't physically present. This leads to another crucial lesson in this Rich Dad, Poor Dad summary. Working hard is not enough. You must work smart, and more importantly, you must work toward ownership, not just income. If you're finding
But
these
here's where
insights
things become
eye-opening so
uncomfortable.
far, and you want
Most
more
people are
deep,
taught from a young
story-driven
age that a safe
breakdowns of
job is
powerful
the best
books like
path
this
in life.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad
Parents
summary,
tell their children,
make sure you
study
subscribe
hard
to
so
the
you can get a
channel.
good
It
job.
helps support the
Teachers
content
prepare
and ensures
students
you
to
don't
become
miss the next
employees,
life-changing
not
book
investors or
explained
business
in a simple
owners.
way.
Rich Dad
Now,
believed
let's
this was
talk
one of the
about
biggest
fear,
reasons
because
people remained
according to Rich
financially
Dad,
dependent
fear
their
is the
entire
number one
lives.
reason people
He
stay
taught
poor,
Robert that
not
financial
lack of
education,
intelligence or
understanding
opportunity.
taxes,
Fear
investments,
of losing
debt,
money
and
stops
cash
people
flow
from
was
investing.
more important than
Fear of
memorizing
failure
facts
stops
that would
people
never
from
be
starting
used in real
businesses.
life.
Fear
And
of
yet,
criticism
most schools
stops
never
people from
teach these
thinking
skills.
differently. Rich Dad believed that mistakes were not something to avoid, they were something to learn from. Every failed investment, every bad decision, every financial loss carried a lesson that made you smarter for the next opportunity. But people who never take risks never gain that experience. Another concept that changed Robert's life was something called the cash flow quadrant. Rich Dad explained that there are 4 ways people earn money: as employees, as self-employed individuals, as business owners, and as investors. Employees trade time for money. Self-employed people also trade time for money, but they work for themselves. Business owners build systems and hire people to work for them. Investors make money from assets that generate income. Most people stay on the left side of this quadrant their entire lives, depending on their own labor to survive. The wealthy focus on moving to the right side, where their income is no longer tied directly to the number of hours they work. This shift does not happen overnight. It requires learning, patience, and often stepping outside of your comfort zone. But the rewards are life-changing. As Robert entered adulthood, he saw the long-term results of both mindsets. His poor dad remained trapped in financial stress despite decades of hard work. His rich dad, on the other hand, built businesses and investments that continued to grow even when he stopped actively working. This is when Robert fully understood one of the most powerful lessons in the entire book. A job may provide temporary security, but true financial security comes from what you own, not from who employs you. Companies can lay you off, economies can crash, industries can disappear. But if you own income-generating assets, your financial life becomes far more resilient. This idea forces you to ask a difficult question. Are you building something that will continue to support you in the future, or are you simply working to maintain your current lifestyle? The message of this Rich Dad, Poor Dad book summary is not that jobs are bad or that everyone must become an entrepreneur. The message is that relying on a single source of income is risky, no matter how stable it appears today. The wealthy understand this, which is why they focus on creating multiple streams of income and constantly improving their financial knowledge. And this brings us to the final lesson, the one that ties everything together. Rich Dad taught Robert that the most valuable asset you will ever have is not money, property, or even a business. It is your mind, your ability to learn, adapt, and see opportunities where others see problems. Financial intelligence is not something you're born with. It is something you build, one lesson, one mistake, and one decision at a time. So when you look at your own life, ask yourself, are you being guided by fear and routine, or by learning and long-term thinking? Because the difference between those two paths determines whether you spend your life running in the rat race or eventually stepping out of it. If this Rich Dad, Poor Dad summary made you reflect on your own beliefs about money, share your thoughts in the comments. Which lesson surprised you the most? And do you think schools should start teaching financial education to prepare people for real life? Your journey toward financial freedom does not start with a lottery ticket or a huge salary. It starts with a single decision: to stop following the crowd blindly and start understanding how money truly works.